Global education and global learning is often seen as a research in education, which is very political. Global education is political as it deals with the most important political challenges we face: climate change, global social justice, and the consequences of globalization. Global learning is political as it reflects learning in the light of political participation and empowerment. And it is political as its branch of education is often directly funded by policymakers and by this it's following its own logic. And this all has consequences for research. And to reflect on research as political act is therefore very crucial. We are very thankful that the important introduction to our conference will be done by one of the most influential scholars in the field of research on globalization, by Professor Emeritus Arjun Appadurai. Professor Appadurai is a global citizen who started his life in India, continued in the US, and speaks to us today from Berlin. Professor Appadurai is a very prominent social cultural anthropologist, having worked at top academic institutions in the United States and worldwide, and being a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He is a world expert on the cultural dynamics of globalization. His research focuses on globalization and the consequences of the increase in complex connectivities, which are dissolving the unity of culture and place. He is author of numerous books and articles, so as recent ones, Banking on Words, The Failure of Language in the Age of Derivative Finance, or about failure in 2019. So Professor Appadurai, welcome for your keynote on research as political act, and the floor is yours.
Vielen Dank, Annette. Merci to Stefania and all the UNESCO colleagues. So let me, because time is precious, say how honored I am to be able to speak, even if remotely, to your gathering. I wish I was in Paris. I am familiar with UNESCO for decades. It's one of the great organizations for me. And now that I'm in Europe, I see how important its role is, not only globally, but also in Europe. As many of the speakers this morning have pointed out, there are many, many initiatives and organizations, networks, which I now see much more richly because of my location in Berlin. So my topic is research as a political act. So I won't talk about everything in the politics of global education, but focus on the word research. And I should say right away that my remarks follow from something I've been struggling with for 2 or 3 decades about this word research. And I have to say this is one area in which I move away from one of my great heroes, the German intellectual Max Weber, who urged all of us to keep our research, as he called it, value-free, wertfrei. Here I disagree with the great Max Weber. You will see why, because I don't think in that sense research should be value-free. So first of all, what is research? That's a huge subject, but I'll keep it very simple. Research is the systematic pursuit of the not yet known. The systematic pursuit of the not yet known. You see already there is a paradox buried there. It is about the not yet known, but it is somehow systematic. How can you have a systematic approach to the not yet known? This is the dilemma of teaching about research at any level, from advanced think tanks and universities to primary school and high school. It's a paradox. It's not known, but we have to be systematic in chasing the not yet known. So who does research? Usually, as we know, it's like people in this room, advanced scholars in universities, think tanks, intergovernmental agencies, the advanced scientific laboratories. In short, it's a very small intellectual elite that does research. I think this needs to be changed. And I've been arguing for this. I even have an article earlier called Research as a Human Right, that we must democratize the capacity to do research. And in a way, that's my simplest message and my bottom line, but I will elaborate it a little bit. Why does research matter? Why is it important to democratize research? In my view, it is the key to development in all of its meanings, including recently in the SDGs and in many other global initiatives. I think research is crucial to any of these levels and meanings of development, because it sets the agenda and defines our understanding of what the priorities are for the SDGs or for any other development goal. But as you know, the big challenge is the skills for doing research are restricted to a small elite, usually from the north, from the Atlantic or European worlds, or trained in them, even if they are in Africa or the Middle East or Australia or India or Latin America. They come from this tiny elite or tiny network, and they come to share what they believe with others in the localities of the world. And it's in those localities, which are mostly throughout the South, but also in the United States and in Europe, but mostly in the poorer, more unequal parts of the world, the researchers who come from this tiny group are the ones who more or less decide the agenda. And although words like participation, empowerment, and so on are used in the conduct of research, it is usually not based on rich local participation. Why is that? It's not just because people have ideas that the West is superior or that technically highly trained people know better. It is because there are not enough researchers in these places. Very simple. It's a manpower problem. It's a human resource problem. So we have spent a lot of time and money concentrating on increasing the number of students in schools and colleges, increasing literacy, increasing teacher training, including increasing library capacities, increasing educational technology. But what about the capacity to do research? That capacity is rarely thought about. I give you this as a challenge. Tell me how many events you have been at, and you are all people who are enormously experienced. How many times has somebody stood up and said, let's put money into democratizing research, in teaching young people, poor people, slum dwellers, farmers, how to do research? No, we don't think about that. That we assume is something special, and we do all the rest. In my view, without a massive increase in locally trained researchers, the priorities for new knowledge are always set by others based on external criteria and priorities. We need local expertise to develop the capacity to ask new questions and find new answers. Let me give you my numerical idea. I would say today, Maximum, there are a few 100,000 people spread out in the whole world who have this capacity. We need millions. So we need to add 1 or 2 zeros to the ranks of the people who we call researchers, not teachers, not librarians, not technologists, not students, not professors, researchers. So democratizing research is a numerically large project. It requires massive scaling up, but it requires, first of all, recognizing it is a priority. Let me put it even more simply. If we don't increase the number of people who are capable of asking new questions and giving new answers in their local worlds, everything else we do for development, including technology transfer, including empowerment methodologies, and so on and so forth, is useless. I use a strong word, useless. So if you wonder why, after 60, 70, 80 years since the West has been investing money throughout the world in development, why are we in a more unequal world? Why are we facing more crises than ever before? Why are there more poor populations in most of the world? The answer is, to me, clear. We've not built the capacity to ask new questions, generate new knowledge, and supply new answers on a wide democratic and geographical basis. I hope this is now clear. This is my mantra or my main lesson. And I add now one more factor in the time remaining to me, a second dimension. And this has already come up this morning. And that is the word citizenship. Very important. I think it's very crucial to the Angel Network. ADG Giannini mentioned it. I think every speaker has mentioned citizenship as somehow important in any discussion of global education. I could not agree more. And for me, when I say research is a political act, it is directly connected to expanding the meaning of the term citizen or citizenship. I think one of our commentators rightly pointed out that the world is drifting to a very dangerous anti-democratic place. It's moving to an authoritarian direction. From the US under Trump, who has still not disappeared, as you have noticed, to the Tory control over Britain, to Viktor Orban in Hungary, to what is happening in Poland, to the victory of Erdogan, and most of all, to the leader in India, Narendra Modi, to Xi Jinping in the People's Republic of China, and to Putin in Russia. Now, I'm not naming everybody, but that is a very large number of polities where the electoral process has been captured by anti-democratic forces. Another paradox, but that is the way our world is. Consequently, the word citizenship is also for me a way of talking about restoring or reviving or revitalizing democracy on a worldwide basis. Again, I believe that the restoration of democracy, of the meaning of constitutions, of elections without corruption, of participation, cannot be done with a small group of theories or experts coming from some parts of Europe or the US and doing some kind of missionizing across the world. It has to be generated locally. The fact is that very large parts of the population are now supporting autocrats, authoritarians, dictators. They're openly saying that is what we want. Now, what do? Democracy looks like it's asking for its own end, its own demise through elections and so on and so forth. I think the answer to that is indeed education in general, but it's also increasing the capacity to do research. And here I think I have to say research means knowing how to document things, how to observe, how to do some basic forms of quantitative analysis, how to present your findings, and how to make those arguments public. To me, research is all those things. And it does not mean that you have to have a laboratory and you have to have a PhD and you have to have a huge library, you have to have thousands of footnotes. No, all you have to do is the capacity to go and do interviews, do a study in your own neighborhood. I myself created an organization in Bombay in the early 2000s called Partners for Urban Knowledge, Action and Research, where we nurtured exactly this capacity among poor youth in the city. That small organization is still active in Mumbai, but people, even today, 20 years later, do not understand the value of teaching poor college students or high school students or even workers the basic techniques of surveys, photography, writing an essay, making an argument, presenting your evidence. This is research. It's not mere literacy, nor is it advanced science. It is a way of saying, I found something out. This is my data. This is my evidence. These are my conclusions. For example, about what are the most important priorities for a young Muslim slum dweller in Bombay. Who knows that better than he or she? But they have to be able to make a case for it. And to make a case, you have to be able to do what we call research and then present it. But the presentation is also very important because they have to find the right audiences. They have to learn how to speak. They have to learn to do what we are all doing all the time, which is to give lectures, make presentations, and to debate others in a principled way, in an evidence-based way, in a data-based way, in an informed way. And honestly, whether in India or elsewhere, when somebody does this, those in power do listen. They cannot ignore it, dismiss it. They have to listen and make some effort to take this kind of research-based voice or intervention into account. I have seen this myself in Mumbai and in India, but I also have evidence of it elsewhere. So democratizing society, let me put it this way, is also requires democratizing research. And it requires democratizing research because then new knowledge becomes a democratic asset or a public good. And new knowledge is the way we shape the future. So one of my distinguished colleagues this morning spoke about my early work. I was very honored on the ethics of possibility, on the building of futures. This has been a big interest for me. But all of this cannot be done on a broad democratic basis unless people understand what is coming, what is new, what will happen. This is not something that can be kept to us and then we ask people to behave democratically. They have to themselves develop the capacity to look ahead and to analyze, to predict, to decide what are important trends, and to determine priorities. Everybody has 1,000 needs, but how do I know what somebody in a slum on the northern part of Bombay really wants? Only when they do research and make an argument and present it to a bigger audience, then I can learn and say, oh, their biggest need is not housing, it's actually jobs, for example. Or their biggest need is not ecological intelligence, it's some other form of economic intelligence. These are tough choices. That's why one of our distinguished colleagues I agree with this morning who said, it's time, I think it's our colleague from Ireland, to go beyond consensus and to open the debate, not to fight with each other, but to share and learn through debate and critical difference. Finally, and I'm going to stop with this last point, but it's a very important one, to create and expand what I would call research-based citizenship. That is not research about citizenship, it's making more citizens researchers. That is what I mean by research-based citizenship. Could be a tremendous asset against fake news, propaganda, and anti-democratic mobilization. All of you know, whether it's the US elections, whether it's Trump's refusal to accept anything that is said about his crimes, or at the other end, whether it's about Putin's pronouncements about what's happening in Ukraine, or the Chinese suppression of what is happening to the Uyghurs, or anything else that all of you know about in your own parts of the world, there is a tremendous amount of fake news, what we used to call propaganda. And this is used to mobilize anti-democratic sentiments. And there is a mystery here. And that is, why is bad news, fake news, stereotyping news, hate news always pushing out good news? This is like the old Gresham's law about coins and coinage, which is bad coins always drive out good coins. And I am still struggling with why this is so. Why is there an appetite, such a big appetite for lies, misrepresentations, stereotypes, and so on and so forth, and so little appetite for what we might call good news? I mean, this is a very huge question. I can't answer it here, and I can't answer it at all. I think it's a high priority question. But one thing is, if instead of 500 people in the city of Mumbai, or 50,000 people in the whole of India who have the capacity to do their own research, if we had 5 million people in the whole of India who did their own research, I guarantee you that the wholesale capture of media by the current regime would become very difficult. The wholesale denial and selection among what matters to take up and what not to take up, what to react to as a scandal and what to ignore. This is all determined by the ruling elites. But if you had 500,000 or 5 million people doing their own research, I guarantee you that the victory of fakeness, propaganda, and hate-based mobilization would be reduced. So let me conclude by saying, of course, there is a great deal else to equity, access, technology. All these were brilliantly covered in the recent UNESCO report, of which I was honored to be a part, on the futures of education, where many colleagues, including my colleague Sobi, were intimately involved. It's a very large set of subjects, and I have touched today only on one, what I call the R word, research. And I don't want to overstate its importance, but I guarantee you it will be helpful if you give thought to making that word a little more visible than it is in all our endeavors. That investment, giving it, adding a zero to the time you give to it in hours, or to the dollars you give to it, or the priority you give to it, will repay itself 100 times over. I'm deeply confident of this, and I ask you to give that idea some consideration. So on that note, I will say thank you very much to the organizers and to all of you who are listening and participating. Merci.